Hi everyone, welcome back to philosophy. Today we are diving into political philosophy. So today we'll focus on John Stuart Mill, who we have already read before, and then we'll also talk about John Rawls. So they're kind of from two different periods. Mill is more from the modern period, kind of going into contemporary, but mostly modern. And so he's from 1806 to 1873, and then Rawls is contemporary. So he's from like 19 something to 2000. So both are like more contemporary than a lot of the stuff we read. So I think it's helpful because like I think John Stuart Mill kind of encompasses a lot of what the founding fathers of America were into, and then Rawls is more of the more progressive liberal approach. And then next week we'll talk about Edmund Burke and Thomas Paine, and that'll be interesting. So Burke is your classic conservative, and then Paine is your classic egalitarian. So first I want to start by going over just basic terms and like setting the stage for what we're talking about. So you can kind of divide all the political sides into this chart. So this chart has been super helpful for me in understanding what's going on, because most of the time we just see like what's happening in our current world, and you have the liberals, you have the conservatives, and mostly we know them by their stances on particular issues rather than knowing like the underlying political philosophy behind it. So I think it's helpful to lay out like really what's happening beneath the surface so that we can see, okay, this is why this plays out in this way, etc. So this chart is super helpful. So you have four main positions. You have the left, well, first separated into the left and the right, two under each. So first you have big L liberalism or egalitarianism. So that is the liberal side of politics today. Then you have left libertarianism. So that is like most libertarians that you hear of today, they're gonna align with left libertarianism. Then you have right libertarianism, which is slightly different. It's actually what Mill is. So a lot of it is similar, but the underlying principles are different. And then finally, on the right, you get conservatism. So right conservatism. Okay. So, like I said, I think today in politics and most of what we learn, we get a lot of caricatures of each of the different views. And so, like, if you watch anything, most of the media, it's going to align with the left. And so, anytime you hear anything, it's, oh, like, the opposite of what we believe is evil. If you turn on Fox News, then you're going to hear from the right side the opposite of what we believe is evil. So you really don't get, okay, why would somebody believe this in the first place? Like, you just get, oh, this person doesn't want anyone to have rights. It's like, whoa, how did you get there? Never a good place to start. You want to start, way before we get there. So, I think in each of these sections or sides of the chart, it's a lot easier to see, okay, why would somebody hold this view? And like going through the chart, like I still think like there's one that's more appealing to me, but it helps me see, okay, I could see how someone could think that instead of just demonizing, the other side or whatever. So anyways, that's why I think it's helpful. So first we're going to start with political morality. So what is the underlying political morality beneath each of these positions? So for both sides of the left, it's Kantianism. And, if you turn on CNN or something, they're never going to talk about Kantianism. And they might not even know that that's the underlying morality behind what they believe. But it is. So it's helpful to see that. And we'll talk about that more in a sec. For right libertarianism, it is kind of a lot of words. It's qualitative. No, that's not right. Not that you can really say it anyways, but qualitative. Oh gosh, I'm sorry. Hedonistic utilitarianism, which, like, Mill is the main proponent or the most classic proponent of right libertarianism. And what did we also read Mill for? Utilitarianism. So that makes sense. And then on the right, you have virtue ethics. So each of these things we've actually gone over in class. So I think utilitarianism and virtue ethics is probably more fresh on our mind, but we did read Kant, and a lot of Kant is based on duty. Like, you do what you're supposed to no matter the consequences, almost, because it's the right thing to do, or whatever it may be. Now on the right is typically much more concerned with consequences. So typically the right has an understanding that you're always playing a game of like benefits and the opposite of benefits, unbenefits. Sometimes you just can't think of words. Sorry. There's always going to be pros and cons. So anytime that you make a law or something like that, even if it sounds like the best law ever, there's always going to be negative repercussions, no matter what. And, well, I should say, maybe not everybody thinks that, but I think it's kind of, I don't know, maybe I'm just being biased, but it's kind of easy to see that there's always you can't make a law that's going to be perfect. I think maybe the one that comes the closest is like don't murder. That's pretty agreeable, but like if you say that, so reading Rawls, talk about distribution. So, okay, distribute wealth so that the lowest in society won't be that low. You're always going to be playing a game of like helping but also hurting people. You're taking away liberty at some point, which in some cases might not seem like a big trade-off, but by the end, liberty is almost non-existent because you've just redistributed everyone's belongings and things like that. Anyways, so I just say that to illustrate that Kantianism based on duty and not super concerned with consequence, and the right is much more concerned with consequence. It's very pragmatic, if you will. So rather than basing everything off of principles, which I think, I mean, it still is based off of principles, but it's okay, in this world that we are in, how do we approach certain issues? So qualitative hedonistic utilitarianism, it is qualitative because if we talk about utilitarianism, then we're like, okay, how much utility can you get? And for qualitative utility, it's unique and different because quantitative utility is just like, okay, how many people can we save? Or like quantitative, so how much literally good can we have? Qualitative is more like, okay, considering like the quality of life. So a quantitative utilitarian might just want everybody to have freedom to do anything that they want. So that could mean, I want to smoke meth and live in a shack, and I should be free to do that. Right libertarianism is unique from left libertarianism because of the qualitative thing. Because the right libertarian would say, okay, you shouldn't have the right to completely waste your life and harm other people, because that's not helpful to anyone. So the right libertarian is in favor of qualitative because it's in favor of an excellent life. So pursuing excellence, pursuing the ultimate good. Mill does not want you to waste your life. He wants you to pursue excellence, and he wants you to have all of the means to do that in whatever way you see fit. So where some things like smoking meth and living in a shack, those are like pretty generally like not good ideas. There are other ways that you could pursue the good that might be different than the way that I pursue the good. So he does account for that. And hedonistic because it is focused on pleasure in a weird way. So say that this is I learned this in one of my classes, and it was really helpful. So say that there is the best tasting hot dog in the world, and I am choosing between, maybe they're right next to each other, these two hot dog stands, between having the hot dog that's going to give me the most pleasure or the hot dog that is mediocre. If I choose the one that is mediocre when given a choice, then that, according to the right libertarian, is irrational. The left libertarian doesn't really care if it's irrational or not. It's your choice, you do it. The right libertarian is concerned with that. It seeks excellence, the good, rationality, things of that nature. So it would be wrong for me to choose the hot dog that doesn't taste the best when given the choice between those two. Like I said, the left is unconcerned with what is rational in that case. It's just, do what you want. Then we get to conservatism, the right, and the underlying political morality there is virtue ethics. So what we just learned about with Aristotle, I think that we can see this because in Hursthouse's paper that we talked about, she talks about phronesis and basically how virtue ethics plays out in tough situations and how it's going to look different depending on your context. And I think that the right would totally agree But in all things, you're still seeking virtue, even if virtue looks different in some cases. I'm realizing that this may seem heady, like kind of in the air and not very concrete, but I hope that as we continue, it will make more sense. Okay, so then we get to the ultimate justifier, which is kind of like the thing that matters most. So the ultimate justifier for egalitarianism is strong autonomy, and I'll define that in a minute. For the left libertarianism, it is weak autonomy. So that will help us determine or see the difference between egalitarianism and left libertarianism. Sorry, yeah, that was right. For right libertarianism, the ultimate justifier, the most important thing is high quantity of high quality pleasures, which goes right hand in hand with qualitative hedonistic utilitarianism. And then for the right, it is maximal number of members in a society of set of objectively truly valuable ways of life. Okay, so for conservatism, it is the maximal number of members of set of objectively truly valuable ways of life. I'll explain that in a second. All right, so starting on the left, strong autonomy versus weak autonomy. Autonomy basically means like freedom, ability to exercise your will. Strong autonomy is that, well, I have it written down. Might be helpful. Yeah. So first we should start with weak autonomy. Weak autonomy is basically that nobody's getting in your way provided you're not taking autonomy from others. So nobody's going to bother you unless you start to take autonomy away from others, and then that's a problem. So that is left libertarianism. Weak autonomy. You can have all the autonomy you want as long as you're not taking it away from other people. Strong autonomy is weak autonomy plus resources. So what I mean by that is that kind of like we're talking about or reading Rawls, redistribution of wealth and resources. Egalitarianism will take resources to make sure everybody has maximum autonomy. Left libertarianism won't do that because they would say that it disrupts liberty. Left would say that it doesn't disrupt liberty because you're giving people more things. You're helping them. What gets tricky with that is that human beings have to be the ones that redistribute the wealth. And unless you believe that human beings are, morally perfect, then that automatically comes with a lot of potential problems. Especially like the government redistributing. It sounds great in theory, and it might still be great for you if you consider like all these at the end and you're like, yeah, there are still cons, but I think this is still the best. But the con would definitely be that the government is, in this case, is the one redistributing, and most people don't have much faith in the government to do what is right. Some people do. Some people think it's great, but I think we can all agree there's some level of corruption in the government, and so to allow them that sort of power could be a potential problem, which left libertarianism sidesteps because they're not saying that autonomy demands resources. All right. So those are like the most important things to them. What's going to justify them in specific cases? Strong autonomy, weak autonomy. Then you get to right libertarianism, which is high quantity of high quality pleasures. That is the ultimate goal. And we kind of, basically it's the morality, but worded different. So the right libertarian wants members of society to have as much pleasure as possible, as much high quality pleasure as possible. And like I said, the right libertarian will distinguish between what is a better pleasure versus a worse pleasure, which left libertarianism won't do. So yeah, that's basically that. And then conservatism, maximum number of members of set of truly valuable ways of life. So the conservative is looking for, they want the members of their society they want their society to have as many members as possible that have a set of objectively, truly valuable ways of life. So the conservative, based on virtue ethics, is going to have objective value that they're seeking. And they want the members of society to seek truly valuable ways of life. So maybe the difference between right libertarianism and conservatism would be that based on pleasure, the conservative is less concerned with high quantity of pleasure, and more concerned with what is objectively truly valuable. That can be hard because people aren't going to agree on what's objectively truly valuable. But if you look at like our founding fathers' principles, like the pursuit of happiness, life, liberty, those are objective values that they all agreed on, and that most of us still agree on today. So it is possible in some sense to agree to some set of objective values. And the left is not concerned with the way that people live, really. All right, then here's the big difference between egalitarianism and conservatism. Egalitarianism is top-down, and conservatism is bottom up. Bottom up. Okay, what do I mean by that? So this is concerning the mode of governance. So we've been talking about kind of abstract concepts of morality or value. So now we're talking pragmatics. So how should the government run? The egalitarian would say that the government or the society runs from the top down. So from the government down. So if you want to make change, the government's going to make that change. So we see this in healthcare. I think that's like the easiest way to see that. With Obamacare or healthcare for all all of those things fall under egalitarianism. You want the government to be fixed, to fix things, and then it's going to flow down to everyone else. That's the goal for egalitarians. The right, the conservative, is taking a bottom-up approach. So it's saying, okay, at the local level, it's more focused on like actual individual groups of people. So like in your city or in your state, because the demographics are different, the context is different, the situation is different. So maybe for Louisiana, you don't need the same type of principles or laws as in Montana, because y'all are in totally different contexts. So the conservative wants the members of a society in a small local society to make the change. So if you really want change, start at the local level and start with maybe have a group of people that's going to enact change. Get a group together, a civil organization, and then y'all do what you want to do. In this way, you don't disrupt liberty. On the egalitarian side, you run the risk of obstructing liberty because the government's about to impose whatever they want upon you. And so in some cases that may seem great. So if you just think, oh, just at the most broad, unidentified level, yeah, I think everyone should be healthy. That would be a good thing. So the egalitarian is going to want, okay, then the government is going to be in charge of healthcare, redistribute everything. The conservative would point out the problem in that such a broad way of governing isn't going to account for unique needs. And you're basically acting in principle over pragmatics, because while it sounds great for everyone to have health care, at that point, healthcare suffers for everyone. That would be their point. Now, the left might say to the right, if you do the bottom-up approach, nothing's going to change because you can't get people to agree, whatever. So, like I said, in each case, you're weighing pros and cons. There's going to be negatives, and it's just how much are you willing to accept, or what are you willing to accept? So, yeah. All right. So in these three, in left libertarianism, right libertarianism, and conservatism, they are looking for minimal government. Minimal government and minimal government. And egalitarianism is not minimal government. So for left libertarianism, right libertarianism, and conservatism, they do not want the government to have much say in things. Kind of because of what I've already said, that having top-down restrictions and laws can get really messy really fast. And having bottom up, you're not imposing things on people's liberty, really, because everybody's kind of doing their thing. It may take a lot longer to be effective, but you're not running the risk of imposing on other people's liberties. And so the overall consequences over time, they would argue, would be less. So, egalitarianism is the only one willing to have not minimal government, because you need maximal government if you're going to be redistributing. My gosh, I don't know why that's so hard to say sometimes. Redistributing. You can't redistribute resources without a really strong government. There's pretty much no way. So, I think that's all we're going to touch on today with the chart stuff. We may bring more in on next week when we talk about Burke and Paine. I think that'll be really eye-opening. The selection that I'm going to post is I don't know, it's just really eye-opening. I was like, I don't know. Every time I read something for the first time, I'm like, oh, it sounds great. Like, I read Rawls. I had a class on Rawls in undergrad, and I was like, oh, who knew? Like, I'm a big Rawls fan. And then I read Mill, and I'm like, oh, yeah, this sounds great. Little do I know that they are incompatible, completely incompatible. Mill and Rawls cannot go together. You can't have minimum government and maximum government. You can't have maximum liberty and redistribution of resources. And then I see people, basically what I'm trying to tell you is I've been each of these things before. So I've landed somewhere. I'm only 25, 24. So who knows? I'll probably keep changing. But yeah, everything sounds great at first. I'm like, yeah, that sounds awesome. And then you kind of see, oh, so that's what that means. Or yeah, whatever. So, oh, there was something I was going to say. Oh, yeah, I also wanted to say, like, give an example from society of each thing. So, the egalitarian is Rawls, basically. And then if you want to think modern, like super contemporary, like Joe Biden or anyone from the left would kind of fit that. Even though you have like different extremes, like Biden versus Bernie, they're pretty different. But all of these things are going to be the same for them. For left libertarianism, it's going to be pretty much any libertarianism that you hear of in the news. So, like Jo Jorgensen, she ran for president, and honestly, you don't hear about many libertarians these days. Rand Paul is more of a libertarian, but he actually might be more of a right libertarian. One of the few. Yeah, right libertarian, unless Rand Paul is. I really don't know of any famous people that would be considered right libertarians. It's like people don't know about it. They don't know. And like then you read Mill and it's like, oh, that actually sounds pretty good. And I think the distinction between left and right libertarianism is enough to make a difference. Like they're very similar, but I don't know. Conservatives, although there's not many that actually. So here's a good example. Amy Coney Barrett. She was just appointed to the Supreme Court. I think she's one of the best examples of a classic conservative. Donald Trump, however, not so much, because he does a lot of things that don't really make sense for the conservative, like throwing money into stuff. He actually did a lockdown, even though, people don't really acknowledge that, but he did, which isn't really something a conservative would do, because you're telling people whether they can or can't leave their home. The stimulus checks, and whether you think they're good or bad, it's just not it doesn't align really with actual conservatism. So I think that like republicanism doesn't really always align with conservatism. Democratic policies, I think, are more likely to always go with egalitarianism. I'm not really sure why that is. I think because conservatism is able to change over time, and egalitarianism isn't really, because it's based on principle and things that just aren't going to change. Conservatism changes based on context, because different solutions are necessary for different situations. So maybe that's why. But here, so a classic conservative would be Thomas Sowell, if you've ever heard of him. He encompasses conservatism pretty well. Judge Antonin Scalia is also a good example of a classic conservative. But yeah, like the people that you hear of from the right that talk the most are typically not encompassing what conservatism really is. So, anyways, yeah, I hope that was helpful. So now whenever we talk about Mill and Rawls, we can kind of not put them in boxes, but also kind of to make them easier to understand. So yeah, Mill is from the 1800s, and his big thing is the harm principle. So he's a right libertarian, so big on liberty, love liberty. The harm principle states that coercion against a person is only justified for the purpose of preventing harm to other people. So the government should never intercede unless it's going to stop the harm of other people. So a law for murder, that's necessary because murdering is the definition of harming someone else. So for Mill, you want the least government interference as possible. And that, yeah, that's going to mean that it interferes for things like murder or, I don't know, other big things like that. Like robbery and things like that. Like, if someone is harming someone else's liberty, then coercion is necessary. Other than that, it's not. So he says the only part of the conduct of anyone for which he is amenable to society is that which concerns others. In the part which merely concerns himself, his independence is of right absolute. Over himself, over his own body and mind, the individual is sovereign. So, big on individual liberty. Everyone is their own person and should be able to act in the way that they want to act. He does touch on utility. So he says, it is proper to state that I forego any advantage which could be derived to my argument from the idea of abstract right as a thing independent of utility. I regard utility as the ultimate appeal on all ethical questions. We know this because we read about utilitarianism. But it must be utility in the largest sense, grounded on the permanent interests of man as a progressive being. And that kind of shows us that it's not quantitative utilitarianism, it's qualitative. Because it's grounded on permanent interests of man as a progressive human being, not just how much utility can you get, but how valuable is that utility. So he says that when the harm principle isn't taken into account and isn't the principle of a society, then the society is not free. And no one in the society is completely free. So he says the only freedom which deserves the name is that of pursuing our own good in our own way. Note that he's saying pursuing our own good. He's not just saying pursuing whatever we want. He's saying pursuing our own good in our own way. That is a difference between the right libertarian and the left libertarian. So long as we do not attempt to deprive others of theirs or impede their efforts to obtain it. So the mantra of right libertarianism is the liberty to pursue your own good in your own way. Now, you might make the argument, what if you believe your good to be being on meth in a shack? That is when Mill would get more objective and say that that's simply irrational. So it's not actually a good. There's no way it can be a good. That's where the hot dog example comes in. All right. He says, no one pretends that actions should be as free as opinions. Acts of whatever kind, which without justifiable cause do harm to others, may be, and in the more important cases absolutely required to be, controlled by the unfavorable sentiments, and when needful, by the active interference of mankind. So he says that actions should not be as free as opinions. This is an important thing to note in the world we live in right now, because there is kind of a movement to, I don't know if they would be honest about this, but to censor freedom of speech. So I've read a few papers about people who think that racist hate speech should be, like, you should get thrown into jail for that. And, you know, on some level, it's like, yeah, no one should say that ever. Absolutely, 100% agree. But whenever you think about, okay, who's determining what hate speech is, and how is that going to change over time, and if you give someone the power to determine what thoughts or words are acceptable, you have to have a lot of faith in them that y'all are going to have similar worldviews. Because while we can all should agree that racist, like saying the N-word and things like that, are completely unacceptable, there's gonna be a time when the person that's controlling your speech and you have a disagreement about what is hate speech and what isn't. And I think we're seeing that as time goes on. So the right libertarian would want any speech, any thought to be free, because actions physically harm other people. And while, yes, words can harm other people, that's not something concrete that the government can really control. It can try, but you really can't censor thought. I mean, maybe you can, but maybe I'm showing my bias. But, all right, moving on. So he also is big on individuality and originality. We, as in me, in high school or in middle school, I feel like I read a lot of books about society, like dystopian societies. So if you've ever read The Giver, where like everything is in gray, everyone is kind of the same, and the people in charge decide what you're going to do with your life. Those type of books, I feel like we read a lot of. I know we're not too far apart in age, but I don't know if y'all did or are. But anyways, it was like, oh, like obvious in that time that you don't want to be like that. And now I don't know that people really have that same view, that would be a negative thing, because of all the talk of government interference and control. So Mill, if you're thinking of The Giver, if you've seen it, he would hate that. He would say, absolutely not. He says, no one's idea of excellence in conduct is that people should do absolutely nothing but copy one another. So people should have freedom. So creativity should thrive. Originality should thrive. New ideas, entrepreneurial concepts should thrive. Everybody in a society being the same is a waste, and it's not going to progress. So big on individual freedom. Yeah, like if you ever read like Anthem by Ayn Rand, it's like a novella. I remember reading that freshman year of high school, and it was about like everyone being the same, and you're defined by a number, or like 1984, which I don't think I ever read that one, but I think it's the same idea. There was another one. I can't remember. There were so many. It was like, yeah, big concern about everyone being the same. And then everybody's becoming the same and nobody's noticing. It's not good. Anyways, let me chill. All right. So he says, in our times, from the highest class of society down to the lowest, everyone lives as under the eye of a hostile and dreaded censorship. Not only in what concerns others, but in what concerns only themselves, the individual or the family do not ask themselves, what do I prefer? Or what would suit my character and disposition? Or what would allow the best and highest in me to have fair play and enable it to grow and thrive? So those are the questions that he wants people to be asking, members of society to be asking. What would allow the best and highest in me to have fair play and enable it to grow and thrive? So we want the freedom, according to Mill, to have the best and highest pleasures and to grow and thrive in that. So then he gets on like a rant about Calvinism, which is interesting. I felt like it came out of nowhere, but probably, I guess, definitely in his time, Calvinism was really popular, and he was not into it, not his thing. So we've talked about Calvinism before, but it's basically that God is sovereign. So though we have free will in some sense, like how Augustine talked about, Augustine was like a Calvinist before Calvinism existed. So there's still free will in some sense, but when it comes to salvation, there isn't free will. You can't choose to love God if you have, it's kind of complicated now. I'm trying to explain it simply, and then I'm like, oh gosh, I've explained it before, is the point. But you can't choose God on your own because your will is depraved. So you can't choose what is good. So God basically interferes with your liberty because God has more liberty than you. Mill doesn't like this because he loves individual liberty. So he probably doesn't want God to interfere with individual liberty. So anyways, he is not a fan. Because he just thinks that Calvinism is like a belief that human liberty isn't really real, which isn't really true. I think he's kind of creating a caricature of Calvinism, but it is what it is. People do that all the time. So yeah, it felt random to me, but worth noting, I guess, I suppose. That's kind of the gist. I mean, once we talk about like the overarching principles behind things, everything else he says is just like, oh yeah, that aligns with what we said. The big idea is his harm principle, and everything else that he says just kind of falls under that. Coercion against the person is only justified for the purpose of preventing harm to other people. Most important thing for him. Big liberty guy. Big individual. All right. Now we're going to move to Rawls. And Rawls also loves liberty, but his conception of liberty is much different. Whenever this is embarrassing because it makes me sound stupid, but whenever I took a class on Rawls, I was more of the libertarian mindset, and then I took that class and I truly thought that I was like, oh yeah, it's like the same thing. Had no clue that Rawls is like your classic liberal. I was just like, oh yeah. Liberty, freedom. I read the words in his paper. I was like, yeah, sounds about right. Sounds about the same. Not the case. Yeah, but anyways, it's just some anecdotes. All right. So he has two major principles. Equality of opportunity and the difference principle. So Mill has one single principle. It's the harm principle. Rawls has two. And they're defined through this lens of the original position. So we should explain the original position. It is a hypothetical situation in which individuals choose the standards of justice for their society. So in this hypothetical situation, it's abstract. It's very abstract. So imagine that you're going to enter a society and you're behind this veil of ignorance, he calls it. So you have no idea what you're going to be in that society. You don't know if you're going to be white, black, Hispanic, wealthy, rich. Those are the same thing. Wealthy, poor, middle class, from a good family, from a rough family. You don't know any of that. So whenever you're in this original position, you are making decisions for the society based upon the presumption that you don't know anything about what you're going to be. So, if I don't know what I'm going to be, then I could be the most disadvantaged of society. So if I'm in the original position, I'm going to choose what's going to uplift them. And then I also could be like the wealthy person. So what's also going to help them. So it's going to help everyone. So any principle that I choose for society is going to be based on what's going to be the best for literally every position, because I could be any of them. The hard part about this is that it's hypothetical, so you're never going to actually be in this position where you have to decide. So the pragmatics could be difficult because it's just not something that actually happens in real life. But it is helpful to think, okay, if I didn't know that I was going to be a white female from a middle class family, what would I want in the society I was going to live in? Which it is really helpful to think about because, like before this class, like I said, I'm from a middle class family. Parents are together. They love each other. It's just like, oh, I'm from the most basic family in the universe. That and I have a lot of privileges because of that. And so I think reading Rawls is helpful because it's like, okay, if I wasn't me, what would I want in a society? So, yeah. And the two principles that he says you'll agree on are the fair equality of opportunity principle and the difference principle. So, For the first principle, he says, each person is to have an equal right to the most extensive scheme of equal basic liberties compatible with a similar scheme of liberties for others. Second, social and economic inequalities are to be arranged so that they are both A, reasonably expected to be to everyone's advantage, and B, attached to positions and offices open to all. So, the first principle is basically the equality of opportunity, and the second is the difference principle. So, equality of opportunity. It's important to talk about because different people mean different things. So when someone like Mill says equality of opportunity, he means that everyone should have the ability to. So what? Okay. Say that there is a job opening, and you have a white and a black person applying for the job, and they are both able to apply. There's no thing that says no black people allowed, right? But the company has a history of only hiring white people. So when both of them are being interviewed, Rawls would point out that this isn't actually fair because while it's open to all, it's not actually equal because this company always just hires white people. That's not fair. So that's when you get things like affirmative action, which are going to assure that minorities are accounted for in the workplace and in colleges and things of that nature. Mill would say that in order to fix that wrong, then you would have to interfere with liberty. So you would have, which affirmative action is kind of interfering with liberty of the company because they now are obligated, they have to choose a certain number of black people. And, fixes the the blatant issue of like, oh, this company doesn't hire black people, make them hire black people. But it doesn't typically fix the underlying racist issues. It normally kind of propagates them. Not always. Sometimes it can be really helpful. But something to think about. Like I said, always weighing pros and cons. For Mill, liberty is more important. It's like the most important thing. So it would be more important than every workplace having an equivalent number of minorities and white people. So the second principle is more about resources and distribution. So he kind of spends some time explaining how his versions of these principles are actually, they coincide with like our typical, the first principle isn't the equality of opportunity, it's the principle of efficiency, and then the second principle is the difference principle. The equality of opportunity is one of the subcategories. So he's trying to explain how his principles align with our classic views of liberty. They just might look different. So talking about equality of opportunity, he says, the liberal interpretation, as I shall refer to it, tries to correct for this by adding to the requirement of careers open to talents the further condition of the principle of fair equality of opportunity. The thought here is that positions are to be not only open in the formal sense, but that all should have a fair chance to attain them. So even though a racist company says, yeah, anyone can apply, they probably don't mean that. They don't mean like anybody can really be hired. They just mean anyone can apply. So Rawls wants to account for that because it's not fair. All right, then we get more into the difference principle. And he kind of states it simply. He says, social and economic inequalities are to be arranged so that they are both A, to the greatest benefit of the least advantaged, and B, attached to offices and positions open to all under conditions of fair equality of opportunity. So, difference principle is basically that if you're going to redistribute resources and interfere with liberty in some capacity, then it must be to the advantage of the least advantaged in the society. So the difference between the top and the bottom is smaller. So Rawls would rather have everyone be middle class than there be a hierarchy, which makes sense. I mean, on the surface, like, yeah, that sounds much better than people not having homes. It's like, would you rather people have homes or not have homes? Oh, I would rather them have homes. Yeah, for sure. So I think the intuitive draw is there for this for sure. All right. Like I said, we kind of covered a lot of it just by talking about egalitarianism, because Rawls is your classic egalitarian. Yeah, I think that covers most of it. The one thing that I hope that people get from our discussion of politics, and we'll talk about it more next time, is that there are underlying morality principles for each and every position. Now, I will say some people don't know this, and they are actually just being mean and not being reasonable. But for a lot of people, there are principles that they don't want to compromise, whether it be liberty or whatever it may be. And so really try, when you're talking to your friend or your family, so the holidays are coming up, try to understand that part, rather than just saying, oh, you don't want everybody to have money or to have health care. You don't think everyone should have health care. You don't care about people, and just like going down that road. Try not to do that. That's my encouragement. Or, oh, you think abortion is good. You love abortion. You hate babies. Also not good. Both sides do the same thing. It's not sweet. So anyways, just a little tidbit at the end, that there's a lot more going on than just people's views on specific issues. Get to the bottom of it. Figure out, and we'll see this with Burke and Paine. I think you can clearly see they have specific principles that are different from each other, but both of those principles have value. And like I said, I do have a side. Like, there is one that sounds more appealing to me, but it doesn't mean that I shouldn't be able to understand why the other side would have their view. I say this because I have had arguments with family members. It's not sweet, and I know that like Instagram or whatever wants everybody to fight all the time, and like, yeah, just go obliterate your uncle at Christmas dinner or whatever. But I don't know, maybe you do want to do that, but I really don't think that it's very helpful. I hope this isn't an advice column. You didn't ask me. But that's what I want you to grasp from all of this. that people believe things for a reason, and they can still be wrong, but you can see why they've come to that conclusion. And then you're in a much better position to help them see the other side. If you just attack them, you're never going to win. Ever. Ever, ever. So don't attack people. Please. Unless you so choose. But I wish you wouldn't. I have. It's not good. All right. So next time I'll post the reading for Burke and Payne. I hope you enjoy it, and we'll see you then.